The NTSB released its final report on the fatal crash of a Cessna 177RG at the Lake Placid Airport in New York, which occurred 2 years ago on October 1st, 2023. This accident tragically claimed the lives of Russ Francis and Richard McSpadden. At the time, Richard McSpadden was the Senior Vice President of AOPA's Air Safety Institute, and for many reasons we chose not to release an early analysis video at that time. Now that the NTSB final report is published, we felt it appropriate to analyze this accident, bring clarity to 2 years of speculation, and most importantly, offer what GA pilots can take away from the events that took place that day. We continue to grieve the loss of Russ Francis and Richard McSpadden, and our thoughts and prayers go out to their families. It was Richard who created this early analysis video series, and by publishing this episode, we honor his memory. As always, we'll review the facts about the pilots, the aircraft, the events leading to the fatal crash, and what GA pilots can learn from it. The aircraft owner was Russ Francis, co-owner of Lake Placid Air Service. He was also an NFL tight end. Russ was a commercial pilot with single and multi-engine land plus instrument ratings. He also had 9,000 hours of total flight time and about 10 hours in the accident aircraft, the Cardinal 177RG. Richard McSpadden was in the right seat. He was a commercial pilot with a CFI, CFII, multi-engine instructor, plus single and multi-engine seaplane ratings. He had over 5,800 hours of flight time, was an avid GA pilot, and he had a distinguished 20-year career in the U.S. Air Force as a fighter pilot, including a tour as the flight leader of the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds. The mission for the day was a formation flight to get some photographs of the Cessna 177RG. It was a Part 91 flight. The lead aircraft was an A36 Bonanza with a photographer on board. The Cessna 177RG was the wingman and was the subject aircraft. During the pre-flight formation briefing, the pilots briefed the safety of flight and agreed that the aircraft owner would be the PIC of the 177 for the takeoff landing portion of the flight, and that the pilot in the right seat, Richard McSpadden, would be the pilot at the controls during the formation portion of the photo shoot. The aircraft was a 1976 Cessna 177RG, November 545 Papa Zulu. The aircraft had 36 hours on it since its last annual inspection and about 76 hours since the last major overhaul on the engine. It was owned and operated by Lake Placid Flying Service Incorporated. The weather that day in Lake Placid was very nice. It was VFR, winds were 010 at 7 knots, visibility was 10 with clear skies, temperature was 73 degrees Fahrenheit. The NTSB in their final report calculated the density altitude to be 2,758 feet versus a field elevation of 1,746 feet. Their calculations showed that on that day with that aircraft as equipped, they would expect a 37% longer takeoff distance and perhaps a 28% decrease in the rate of climb just because of the density altitude. Lake Placid Airport sits just south of Lake Placid and was the home of the 1980 Winter Olympics. The non-towered airport has a single runway, 4,196 feet long, paved, and the upward elevation is 1,746 feet. The airport sits atop a flat plain surrounded by steeply falling off terrain at the approach end and departure end of runway 32 and on the north side of the airport. This terrain can be seen in this picture, and it will also be more evident in photographs we'll show in a few moments in this analysis. The NTSB final report includes several photographs taken by the photographer in the Beechcraft Bonanza. The photographer had sight of the accident aircraft as it was taking off, as it lifted off and began its climb out. The photographer briefly lost sight of the accident aircraft as the tail of the Bonanza blocked the rearward view, and then the photographer reacquired the accident aircraft through the back left window of the Bonanza. This picture from the A36 Bonanza photographer shows the aircraft just lifting off just past the numbers for runway 32. In this photograph from the NTSB final report, you can see the aircraft is climbing out. The landing gear are still down, so it's just after liftoff. But after this photo was taken, the NTSB report states that a witness observed the accident airplane suddenly made a hard right turn in the direction of the airport. During the turn, the report states that the pilot of the Beechcraft heard the pilot in the right seat of the accident aircraft, which is Richard McSpadden, transmit on the CTAF frequency that's something similar to, "We have a problem and we're returning to the airport." In this photograph from the NTSB report, you can see the aircraft just seconds before impact. The landing gear were down or in transit. The stabilator appears to be in a position for a nose-up attitude, and the NTSB report states that the flaps were at 10 degrees. Post-crash photographs provided in the NTSB docket show that the flap lever was set to what appears to be 10 degrees, and the landing gear handle was in fact down. These photographs also show the mixture was rich and the prop lever was set to full forward or flat pitch for takeoff. The NTSB accident report includes a 7-second video of the accident aircraft just before impact. This was taken by a nearby home video camera, and you can see that the aircraft was in a right descending turn. You can hear the engine is still producing at least partial power, and the aircraft exit the screen to the left just a second or two before impact. The NTSB report includes a detailed description of the flight and a picture of the flight as derived from data pulled from a portable GPS receiver in the cockpit. The data shows the takeoff roll began at 16:07 and 45 seconds local time, reached a maximum altitude of 1,929 feet MSL or 183 feet AGL at time 16:08:41. The speed at that time was 53 knots. From this point, the aircraft began a descent to the impact point and its hard right turn to get back to the runway. The GPS recorded a time from the aircraft lining up on runway 32 to the impact was 1 minute and 2 seconds. The last data point was observed at 16:08 and 47 seconds. From the moment the aircraft began its right turn to return to the airport until it impacted the ground was only 13 seconds. This was a very tight timeline from the first response to the problem to the impact. The NTSB report includes pictures from the New York State Police drone unit, and in this photograph you can see the first responders and other response vehicles that are on the flat surface of the airport, and then the photograph of the accident aircraft just below the first responder vehicles. That's where the terrain is very steeply dropping off from the flat surface of the runway. This is another angle of the crash site from the New York State Police drone unit. In this image, you can see how steep the embankment is below the flat surface of the runway. You can see the ladders of the fire trucks. You can see what appears to be a line securing the aircraft and ladders going down to the wing. The NTSB final report includes several witness reports. We examined these three very carefully. There was a glider pilot who had just landed on the grass adjacent to runway 32 who observed the Cardinal with a slightly longer takeoff roll than the Bonanza before it. At liftoff, he observed white smoke coming from the exhaust pipes of the Cardinal. In his words, it was poof, 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 and then nothing. The smoke stopped. And he also stated that the Cardinal was barely going up, in his words. The pilot of the Bonanza, the Photobird, reported that the mission brief occurred in the FBO prior to the flight, and that the Cardinal owner would be the pilot in command and would perform the takeoff and landing duties. After startup in the ramp area, the Bonanza pilot taxied up next to the Cardinal so that they could see the Bonanza was ready. The engine was turning on the Cardinal, and then the engine shut down, and about 5 seconds later, the Cardinal pilot restarted the Cardinal's engine, and a few seconds later, the right-seater reported they were ready for taxi. Another witness account we examined closely was that of a CFI who had ridden with Russ Francis on the flight previous to the accident flight. The CFI flew right seat so Russ could prepare for the photo hop. During that flight, at about 200 feet on a normal climb out, they heard a noise, they felt a draft. The instructor looked over his left shoulder and noticed that the cargo door had been opened. At about 500 feet AGL, then the pilot in command was observed by the CFI to make a very abrupt left-hand turn back to runway 14, having just taken off from 32. The CFI also stated in his witness testimony that it was upsetting, to say the least. After that, the landing was fairly normal. He stated that there were no issues noted with the engine or anything else with the airplane. In the final report, the NTSB also did an extensive analysis of the weight and balance. They could not find weight and balance that had been calculated for that specific flight, so they estimated the weight and balance using information from the pilot operating handbook and other aircraft records. They determined the accident aircraft to have a CG that was 1 inch forward of the forward limit for the day of the accident flight. The estimated gross weight was 2,508 pounds, which is almost 300 pounds less than max gross. The pilot operating handbook states that the stall speed with power off, flaps 10 degrees, with a forward CG to be at 56 or 57 knots calibrated airspeed. With the weight and balance information in mind, we now go back to the NTSB chart depicting the aircraft's route over the ground with altitude and airspeed, and we can see that the aircraft decelerated below 57 knots at about the point it was turning right to come back to runway 14. After this point, the track data shows that the aircraft was in a descent that continued until the point of impact. The NTSB report confirmed that control continuity was confirmed and that there were no discrepancies found in the fuel system. Flaps were established at 10 degrees. That was confirmed in the post-accident analysis. Stabilator trim was in the neutral position. Fuel selector was on both. No obstructions were noted in the fuel system, and there was fuel observed draining from one of the wings at the impact site, which indicated there was fuel in the aircraft. They observed 17 gallons recovered from the right tank. And the landing gear were also observed in the intermediate position. The NTSB also did an extensive post-crash analysis on the engine. They found that there were no discrepancies to the propeller, cylinders, magnetos, fuel system, anything that would impact engine operation. They concluded from a sound spectrum analysis of that 7-second video that the aircraft was producing power, at least partial power, and had a RPM of approximately 2,145 RPM. They could not conclusively determine why the aircraft was producing partial power. In the end, the probable cause determination for this fatal accident was partial loss of power due to undetermined reasons. Contributing factors were the pilot's inadequate pre-flight in weight and balance planning, also the pilot's aggressive low-altitude maneuvering, which resulted in an aerodynamic stall and loss of control of the aircraft. There are plenty of things to be taken away from this for GA pilots to benefit from. Pilots have debated whether a 180-degree turnback is an option after an engine failure, the, quote, impossible turn. Whether it's a viable option or not for pilots in that situation. The 180-degree turnback is a risky maneuver performed close to the ground, and many factors contribute to a successful outcome. The Air Safety Institute maintains the position that the 180-degree turnback is only a viable option in certain aircraft at the right altitude, in the right conditions, and when flown by proficient pilots who have been trained on that maneuver. The FAA Advisory Circular is also good to review, which says instructors should train pilots of single-engine aircraft not to make a 180-degree emergency turnback to the field after an engine failure unless altitude, best glide performance, and pilot skill allow for a safe return. In June 2021, the Air Safety Institute produced a reality check video entitled "The Runway Behind You," in which 4 pilots in 4 different aircraft attempted the 180-degree turnback after a simulated engine failure on takeoff. Following release of that video 4 years ago, we observed many comments on social media that were critical of our analysis of the 180-degree turnback. In this short excerpt of the reality check video, please listen to Richard's own words as he emphasizes the conditions when a pilot in command should attempt this challenging maneuver.
Opponents of the turnback argue that it's impossible in some aircraft and near impossible in the rest. Even with a glide ratio that makes the turnback technically possible, they say, the difficulty of the maneuver, close proximity to the ground, a startle factor, and the stress of life or death consequences all conspire against a successful outcome. Proponents argue that turnbacks are a viable option for some pilots in some aircraft under some circumstances. As for the FAA, they caution that CFIs should train single-engine pilots not to attempt a turnback unless altitude, best glide performance, and pilot skill allow for a safe return. Our takeaway is that turning back is a viable option for certain aircraft in the right conditions flown by proficient pilots who train for the maneuver. Variables like wind, temperature, density, altitude, runway length, and technique could affect these results, but not enough to change our overall recommendations. Fly with a CFI at altitude first and determine your strategy in the event of an engine failure on takeoff.
So what are the takeaways from this tragic crash? What can GA pilots learn from this? One is to assess the surrounding environment of every airport you fly from. Understand the terrain, understand the obstacles, and you can do this on arrival to an unfamiliar field, or you should be familiar with your home airport as well. Understand that stalls can occur at any airspeed, any altitude, any attitude, and any power setting. Remember, stall speed increases by the square of the load factor. At 60 degrees angle of bank, it's 2 Gs. That means your stall speed goes up by 40% as compared to when your wings level. Another takeaway is to be proficient in engine failure procedures and best glide speed for your aircraft. Another one is to be prepared for the emergency before you go to full throttle on takeoff. Review the what-if scenarios. Have a plan. That plan should include familiarity with any differences in CG for that flight and how it might affect the performance of the aircraft. It's imperative the pilots know the minimum altitude at which they can even begin to attempt a 180-degree turnback or the impossible turn. Pilots should know that number. They should have trained with it with a CFI, and it should not be tried below that altitude or if you haven't had training in the maneuver. And lastly, we believe that you should treat any partial power emergency as a total loss of power. If you have extra power, great. But if your options are being chosen because of the partial power and then you lose power, you may have made a wrong decision. For more information about this and many other topics, please visit the Air Safety Institute website, specifically our Safety Center page, where you'll find information on this and many other topics to help you. Thank you.